Oh man, at this time of year, the light, the colour, they just sing. So I'm starting this video in the woods because nature, trees, landscape, I think are perfect subject matter for exploring a technique on the gel plate that I want to share with you. Now, both these images were made by way of a paper collagraph transfer on the gel plate. And here you can see one of those paper collagraphs before I used it, and it got all kind of manky and covered in paint. And you can see it's very heavily textured. And that's the key to this technique. Lots of different height and texture of relief surfaces on that collagraph plate will help you get your image transferred. So I'll run you through a few tips and tricks to get you started. Obviously, well, not obviously, you could work in quite an abstract manner with this, I think, but if you want to work quite representationally, you'll need an image to start with. So I've sketched out a really simple kind of collection of tree trunks here from a photograph I took. So it is as simple as this. Get your glue stick. I suggest glue stick's probably the best thing to use, but gel medium has worked quite well as well. PVA is a bit heavy. Apply it where you want your kind of wrinkled texture, and then loosely stick your tissue paper down before it sets. Manipulate it, create some ridges, some little kind of wrinkles, and then of course let it dry. Now once it has dried, you can rip it back on the edge to keep a kind of rough edge. As I'm doing here, you can use a knife if you want a slightly cleaner edge, and you'll find you can really be quite specific where you apply these textures and, you know, in the shapes and kind of amount of disturbance to surface that you want. Okay, you can see where I'm up to. I've applied this kind of crinkly, wrinkly tissue paper technique to all of the branches and trunks. Now I need a way of kind of treating my negative space on my background differently so that it stands out and behaves differently when we do the transfer process. Now I want my background to be quite clean, and I also want some areas on the actual trunks of the trees to be quite clean and kind of highlights as well. So my way around this is by building that surface up, so it's the highest point of relief on the collagraph, and also quite smooth, because then the theory is it will pick that acrylic paint straight off the plate, because it will be the first point of contact, and of course flat as well. So my next move was, depending on where I want my kind of smoother surfaces, cleaner areas of either highlight or just negative space background, I use different papers to get slightly different heights. So here I'm using just copier paper, and I'm sticking this along the edge of one of my kind of main tree trunk on the right hand side there, and you notice that I've stuck the clean edge, the cut edge down, and the bit to the right hand side I'm going to rip back in hope that that blends. Now these parts that I'm pointing out in the background, my negative spaces, I'm going to trace off and transfer those shapes to thick card, 220 GSM, the same stuff I used for the base, and transfer those, snip them out with my knife and just stick them on. Now these will be the highest points in relief on my collagraph, and therefore they should in theory make contact and pick up the paint on the gel plate first of all, and my textured areas of tree trunk will be sunk a little lower in the mix and only make partial contact with the gel plate, and therefore leave that kind of residual texture and disturbed surface. So this was the thinking. You can see me ripping back there the thinner copier paper. This is on the trunk, and I'm trying to get a clean highlight on that left edge, with on the right hand edge my kind of textured wrinkly tissue paper work. And what you see me doing now is just sort of patching in different layers of paper in the kind of foreground and the part of the earth where the trees are growing from, and this is just to kind of break that surface a bit. Again, I've got some clean edges that I've stuck down, and then the kind of back edge, if you like, I've left only partially glued, that I'm going to come and rip back so they get a smooth blended, or the hope is a more even kind of blended transition into the darker areas. So you watch, if I rip this back now, I've got some clean edge and then some kind of very rough and blended edges where the rips appear, and I'm just hoping that these kind of just break up and don't give me too much clean cut edge where I wouldn't really want it. Again, this is an experiment, so it kind of, you're not in full control, but if you get lucky and you judge it right, it should work. So look, this is really the last stages. I've shifted the position of the light so you can really see the texture underneath that kind of low angled light source, and you can definitely see those areas of negative space. The parts between the branches are really sitting up quite proud. That's where I put 220 GSM card on these parts here. So ripping back any little loose scraggly bits and just doing my last check before I go and try and transfer it onto the plate. Now if I freeze it here, you can really see under the light the extent to which this is a relief surface. Okay, so now we're ready for transferring this onto the gel plate. Now setting up, not as thin as you would like a kind of magazine or a laser copy transfer. You can be a bit more liberal with the paint and ink up a little thicker, but it still wants to be a nice, smooth, even layer, even if it is a little thicker than you'd use for, as I said, laser copy or Chinagraph or oil pastel transfer, any sort of resist work. So as long as it's pretty even, you should be fine. And then of course the next step is you've got to work fairly quick. You don't want that paint to dry too much on the plate, and when putting your transfer drawing, your collagraph onto this, you really want to apply even pressure. So I'm flipping it over now and just dropping that very lightly. I'm working on the big gel plate here, which is like 20 by 16 inches. I'm not using all of it, just about, just over A3 size I'm working on, or bang on A3 size. And that pressure, I'm not worrying about how long I'm leaving it down, because I'm going to let this dry completely once I've peeled it up, and use a colour or a gel medium to pull it. So I'm just making sure I've made contact, and you can kind of feel through the back of the collagraph to those textured and relief areas to know where to press. So this is my first copy. I'm having a little look under a corner, realised I probably just need to leave it a little longer and apply just a tiny bit more pressure. This is all very much in real time to give you a sense of exactly what is going on. And it's fingertips, using your palms, and it might even be easier to shut your eyes to do it, to really get a sense of what's made contact. Anyway, what you can then do is, there'll be a point where that paint has dried so much, whatever you're doing is not really going to be having much effect. I would say after about 30-45 seconds. So then peel up and see what you're left with. Now, this was my first transfer. It wasn't too bad. I've got some interesting textures on the trees where I've built up that negative space, that background area. It's definitely pulled the paint off the surface. So I just flip it around so you can see the whole image. So I let that dry for a couple more minutes so I could then add some white acrylic to the plate. And again, I was quite liberal with this. I wanted to make sure I had a good even coverage, and this wet layer of white is what I'm going to apply the paper, once it's rolled out, apply that paper straight onto, and then let that dry for a good 10 minutes I'd say, and the white layer in drying onto the paper pulls the black layer off with it, and hence your image. If you haven't done much gel plate printing before, that's kind of how it works when you pull a print in kind of multiple layers like this. So After a good 10 minutes to make sure that was fully dry, I felt the back of the paper. I picked up a good tip in a comment on this channel somewhere way back now, is if you feel the back of the paper and it feels cold, it's likely to be still wet, and then it's likely to kind of rip as you peel it up because that acrylic paint hasn't dried, or hasn't dried, should I say. So flipping it over there, you can see, you know, it's not too bad. I would definitely want some more dense areas of light and dark on some of those trunks. They look a little flat, but definitely potential. You know, there was enough in this first experiment to encourage me and keep me moving to push on. And herein is the beauty of these collagraphs, is that you can reuse them. And where they're really heavily textured like this, I'm finding you can use them. Well, I'm finding, I've only really done it on this one and one other, but you can really use them a lot of different times. So I've transferred again here, and I've cleaned up some of the kind of residual stuff in the negative space, the background areas, with a bit of masking tape. I've let that dry, and I'm now going to hand paint some areas on those trunks to try and kind of increase the feeling of form and sense of shadow and light. So I transferred the initial collagraph in a very dark green, and I've mixed up quite a light grey purple colour, and I'm just painting straight onto the plate with a nice soft sort of kind of watercolour brush. And I've mixed in with that paint a tiny bit of gel medium just to thin it a little bit. As that was drying, I used a bit of kind of kitchen roll just to kind of disturb that texture a little bit as well. And then I was ready to go ahead and try another pool. This time I kind of mixed a buff colour with some titanium white. Again, nice even coverage. Paper on. I left it longer this time, probably 15 or 20 minutes, and just added a couple of little pastel highlights in again. And there you go. A kind of more interesting, more tonal, with a little more depth, and obviously the interest of some colour as well this second time round. But as I said before, that collagraph would allow me to do at least another 5. Okay, I'm going to zip through one more example now, just because I tried a couple of things different with this one, and again started with a really simple line sketch of just this time a mountainous landscape. I thought maybe the wrinkles might describe a rock kind of texture and form quite well. So again, glue stick or gel medium in this case, painted where I want to create those textures. Sometimes I use deli paper on this one, and it was a bit more precise in the shape that I cut out, and then wrinkled it just ever so slightly as I applied it. So I've got both deli paper on here and some tissue paper, as well as sticking on some more kind of flat areas of collagraph where I wanted some highlight and some cleaner areas, and some background texture here that I'm silhouetting out the whole sky to keep that clean. I also used a biro to do some hand-drawn parts which would emboss the page and create some line work as well. And there you go, peel that up and you can see that certainly those textured areas have created something of interest. You know, this, as I said, was just a fairly quick experiment to see how the technique would work with this type of landscape as well. Here I'm just using an old kind of store card for scraping on some colour. So instead of using the brush this time, I used a different surface. I'm then using my little piece of rolled and folded masking tapes to get some highlights pulled out. You can use it on the side as I'm doing here to create kind of a more sharper, linear kind of highlight. You can use it quite flat to get a texture, a kind of broken texture. And again, once all that was dry, added a bit of colour to the sky, let that dry, and then using again just a big layer of white to pull all of these layers off. And this one I left for a good half an hour because it was actually pulling off quite a lot of layers. And there you go. Doesn't look too bad. Certainly encouragement to go back to this, perhaps with a collagraph I spent slightly longer on. And I really like those kind of sharp highlights where I've pulled off paint with those little bits of masking tape. And I really love the biro embossed lines as well. So combining these techniques, I think is, it's great. Why not? If you think it will work, you go for it. Okay, one more pull just to illustrate how you can kind of keep going with these and experiment and try something different every time and kind of perfect your colour scheme or your textures or whatever. And this time I transferred in a grey, then hand painted with some, again with a little palette knife, some of the grey areas, and put a little kind of pink blush in the sky before pulling off. What did I do? I can't even remember now, but I think I might have even used gel medium to pull this one up. But again, so much fun to be had. Hand colouring plates, experimenting with different colour schemes. You can even kind of add more collagraph material or embossed areas drawn in between each print, just to keep experimenting, adding to, modify. What a great flexible technique and approach this could prove to be. Now there you go. I hope you enjoyed the video. I reckon it's a technique that is quite versatile. You could probably apply it just as well to portraits, creating kind of abstract textured pieces for collage. I don't know. Hopefully it will have sparked a few little kernels of ideas in your minds. Please feel free. Any questions or suggestions, just drop them in the comments below. And remember to subscribe to the channel. That helps the algorithm, apparently. And I'll look forward to seeing you soon for another video. Ta-ta.